Good morning and welcome. My name is Sarah Long. I'm the Coordinator of Continuing Professional Education here at Dominican University. I'll be your moderator today. First of all, a housekeeping detail. If you have any problems during this webinar, please contact 708-524-6687. We have people standing by to help you. I'm joined this morning by Kate Merrick. Kate is our Dean of the Graduate School of Library and Information Science. Kate will be watching the chat for your questions today. But our main speaker is Jason Kuhl, Executive Director of the Arlington Heights Memorial Library. Jason has been with the library since 2008 and was named Executive Director in 2012. He was one of the people responsible for successfully reorganizing AHML's reference service. He's going to share his experiences in that enterprise with us today. Jason?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hopefully you can all hear me. And this is indeed Reorganizing Reference for Maximum Community Impact. So one of the first questions people might have is, how does the executive director at the library qualify to talk about reference? And as Sarah mentioned, I've been with Arlington Heights since 2008, and I came here as Information Services Manager. So I was, when I came to Arlington Heights, I was the head of adult reference. And then prior to that, I was with St. Louis County Library in suburban St. Louis for about 9 years in various branch management capacities. And then also I started there as an adult reference librarian. So, and this is an interesting presentation for me because it really has its roots in a presentation I did a couple of years ago at PLA in Philadelphia. I did it with a couple of colleagues, Richard Kong, who's now at the Skokie Library, and Celeste Choate from Ann Arbor, who is next week starting as the director of the Urbana Library. So, and we all kind of brought our own experiences with reference, and since that point, I've given this presentation kind of over and over in some different form because it was so popular that I look at this is like the presentation that refuses to die, because I keep having opportunities to give it as webinars or in other venues. But what's interesting about that is when we first started with this 2 years ago, we were entering a period where at Arlington Heights we were about to embark on sort of a service model change and really a realignment and going into a building renovation. So at that time, what I was really presenting about was a lot of our ideas, what we were going to do. Then we fast forward to today, and we have renovated our building. We have completely reorganized basically our entire organization here. And so we kind of now have a year's worth of experience, essentially, living in this new model. And we really then see how looking at things differently has really separated the idea of reference from what it was in the past. And I think it's important to look at that first. What we talk about when we think about like the traditional or the past model for reference service. And for anyone who has seen me do a presentation before, I always try to work this picture in because it's one of my favorite pictures. And I like it. I was looking for an old picture initially because I didn't want the embarrassment of somebody in the picture actually being in the audience. So I tried to find as old a picture as I possibly could. But then I started to think, and you look at this, and this isn't that different from what you see in many libraries today, even now. I mean, really, library service models for reference and for anything else haven't changed all that radically since this time in many libraries. You replace the clothing, you replace the hairstyle here, and maybe put a computer on the desk, but and you might still see a scene something like this in many libraries where you have your librarian sitting behind a desk, waiting for a customer to come up, presumably to ask a question. The one thing I think is hilarious is she's surrounded by signs here that make it seem as though she really doesn't want to talk to the person. She just wants to point to a sign that says, please show library card, instead of asking for the library card. But you know, this is kind of what I think about when we talk about that traditional reference model, and you see the books around her. I mean, I see reference books behind her that many libraries still have, and this is probably a 40-year-old picture. So that, I think, is what we I look at as the traditional model of reference, along with things like this: stacks, rows and rows and rows of books. This was taken at my library less than 5 years ago. I mean, we just had an incredibly large reference collection of adult reference materials. And what was kind of funny about that is, they were so precious to us that inside of each one we put not one but 2 stickers that say that these are for reference, and not just that you can't take them from the library, but it says you can't even take them from this room because they were that precious. And the idea that our reference materials are guarded in that way, that they're so special and they're so precious, that's the idea of this past reference model, this traditional reference model that I feel very strongly is dead now. And I feel strongly that if you don't believe that, and if you're not seeing that, it's simply because you're not looking. And I'm speaking from a public library perspective here. It may be different in an academic environment, but to me, really that traditional reference model is completely dead. And if we kind of zero in on my library for a moment, when I started in 2008 as the manager of information services here, one of the first things I did was I looked back at reference trends, and I looked back 10 years. We had statistics going way, way, way back, but I looked at the past 10 years. And the description for this webinar referenced an 85% drop in reference transactions. And I mean, that's telling, but at least for me, looking at the actual hard numbers makes it even more startling. That when I started in 2008, we were doing about 36,000 reference questions a year. And these are adult reference questions, your traditional reference questions. But prior to that, 10 years earlier in 1999, we were doing over 250,000. I mean, to me, that just really drives the point home that in that relatively short period, you go from 250,000 transactions to just over 35,000. And the same applies to the use of the material as well. We do a good job, or as good a job as you can, keeping internal use statistics of how often things are used within the library. And we went back and I looked at that for a period of, I think it was at least 5 years prior, for our very large reference collection, and what we found was almost a quarter of it didn't get used at all in that 5-year period. And really only 14% was used more than 6 times, and 6 times is not a lot when you're talking about a period of years. So what you see here is, I mean, the vast majority of our collection was used fewer than 5 times in 5 years, or an average of once a year. So there were some that said, well, recording internal use is difficult, and people, particularly with reference, they pick the book up off the shelf, they leaf through it, they put it back on the shelf. So it's not getting counted. If they don't find the answer in it, say they don't find what they need, they're just going to put it right back on the shelf. So we wanted to find another way to measure the use of our collection. And what we did is we went to the reference librarians themselves, and we basically recorded every item that we used when we helped a customer. And not just if you found the answer, but every single item, print item that you consulted in helping a customer. And our intent was to do this for a year. And within the first 6 months, we just stopped because it was very, very obvious that there was no need to continue, because this is what we found. Among our reference librarians, they only used 6% of our collection to help customers in a period of 6 months. And to me, that's probably the most telling thing of all, because it isn't about knowledge of the material. These are reference librarians. These are the people who know what we have, know how to use it. These are the people trained to use it. These are the experts on these sources. If anyone is going to use it, it's going to be reference librarians, and they weren't using it. So clearly, we realized something had to be done. What you may think, you see an 85% decrease in reference transactions, you see these materials not being used, and you wonder, well, what's going on with the rest of the library? Is this just an overall trend of less and less use of the library? And No. I mean, at least in our case, it's not, because in that same period, we look at our annual visits, and if you see on the screen here that the dark gray bar on the left, that is in 1999, and the lighter gray bar in the middle, that is in 2008. That's the same period that we saw that drastic decrease in reference transactions. We saw an increase in people through the doors. And the red bar on the right, that was last year, so it's continued to increase. And the exact same thing can be said of circulation. What you're seeing, that gray bar is 1999, the one in the middle is 2008. So while we saw an 85% decrease in reference transactions, we saw a 60% increase in circulation of almost 1 million items. And the red bar again was last year. We now do about 2.6 million items circed a year. So we look at that as the people have spoken. You know, this community loves its library, very, very well used, very, very well supportive of the library. We are tremendously successful, but people aren't using that reference service like they were before. And one of the things that really kind of bothers me is when we looked at that original chart there, that you see 250,000 questions down to 35,000, people say, well, if people just knew what we offered, they would use it. People, if they only knew. Well, in 1999, when we did 250,000 transactions, they knew then, and we haven't gotten any worse at promoting our services. At least for us, we've gotten better. So it's not that. It's absolutely not that, any more than, you know, people aren't using audio cassettes anymore. It's not because they don't. It's the publicity of them. It's because the need just simply isn't there anymore. So one thing that I find interesting is I think it scares us. This idea of reference is going away, or it has to change. And I think, why does it scare us? Because we change things in the library all the time. So I just started typing out things that we've either added or taken away, just in libraries in general. And like in under a minute, I just came up with all of these. And I mean, if you think about it, we could come up with together many more slides of things that we change. And we change things all the time. We adjust our services for what the community needs at any given time. So why does this idea that reference is changing kind of scare us so much? And I think it does, because the fact that you're all here listening to me right now, the fact that I'm approached all the time to give this presentation, and at every conference there's what to do about reference, how to reorganize reference, is reference dead? Why is it such a kind of a big deal to librarians who otherwise do add new services, take services away, add new materials? We change all the time. And I think a lot of it is because that idea of how does reference need to change, that's not, or is reference dead, or does reference need to be reorganized? That isn't really the question. I mean, the real question, I think, is are we still valued? And there's something about reference that I think really speaks to our core as librarians. I don't want to sound kind of flippant about it, but it's sort of the smart part of the job. It's the part of the job where we have training, we have skills that the general public doesn't. That it's why we went to library school. In many ways, I think for a lot of us, it was our first introduction to librarianship. We may have, while we were in school, we did reference, or at least when I started, I mentioned when I worked at St. Louis County Library, at that time, all new professional librarians, we started in the adult reference department. That was sort of just the feeder for all the new librarians. So that was our entryway into librarianship. And then I think for those of us who have worked in libraries prior to becoming librarians, and that's a big chunk of librarians have, it might sound familiar that there was always, at least where I worked, a feeling, or it was said, a mandate, that there are certain questions that only reference librarians answer. Like, if you're not a reference librarian, you don't touch this question. So there's sort of an aura around the specialized knowledge that reference librarians have, that all those things wrapped together, I think, contributes to why the idea that reference is changing is so scary for us. And then there's also the practical consideration of, well, if reference changes, what happens to all of our reference librarians? In many libraries, larger ones that have reference departments, that's the department that is the most heavy with MLSs, which means it's also probably one of the most expensive departments as far as staffing goes. And that's a practical consideration, that if reference is changing, what do we do with all these people? Because some can transition into other roles, but perhaps some can't. So in Arlington Heights here, those are certainly things that we had to think about. And we were in a very interesting position in that we were about to embark on what was sort of called the three-headed monster. We had been watching the way people were using the library. We had to do a building renovation anyway because it was essentially time to do a lot of maintenance. And we really wanted to look at our service model and the services that we provided. And really kind of think about, was it still right? Was it still the right thing to do? And we knew we were going to be making some changes to our service model. And then that's the first head of the three-headed monster. And then the second head was we were going to completely realign our org chart, our organizational structure. And then third, do a building renovation to support that new service model and that new organization. So we started out by really asking three questions. We asked, first and foremost, what does the community need? I mean, that is the most important. How are people using the library? What are the needs here in Arlington Heights? And then what services can we offer to meet those needs? And then finally, how do we offer those services? And that really speaks to our service model. And this is kind of, for the rest of our morning here, this is sort of the structure that I'm going to take here. Looking first at kind of what the community needs. And I do want to emphasize, though, that, and this is something that now that I've been an administrator, kind of I see more, but it's something that I impress upon my staff completely, that everything we do at the library ties together. We're not a collection of individualized departments that all just happen to be in one building. You know, we provide library service to our community. And we have different departments to do that, and we have different services to do that, but the result is we want the best library service. So we don't enter into anything saying we want to provide the best adult reference or the best children's programming or whatever. We want to provide the best library service, and there are a lot of moving parts in order to be able to do that. And I'm a big proponent of library planning by using a vision. And I think any successful organization needs to have a vision of what they aspire to be. And then you use that vision to set priorities and designate the services that you provide based upon that and how you're going to achieve your vision. So just real quickly, this is ours. And you'll notice that there's nothing here that refers to any specific department. There's nothing here that refers to a book. There's nothing that refers to any specific service. This is all about the outcomes for our residents here in Arlington Heights. And I think the first two bullet points here are very applicable to the discussion of how reference needed to change in order to meet the vision. So that first bullet point, we want to partner with our residents so they will be successful. I mean, ultimately, that's our mission here, is to make our taxpayers, make our funders more successful in whatever stage of that life they're in. And then the second bullet point, to help our local businesses and other community agencies thrive. We're very mindful, in fact, a quarter of our tax base is from businesses. It's not from individuals. And many libraries don't give enough service specifically to businesses, even though they are one of our funders. So I won't go much further in our vision, but this was written and approved and passed by our board after a lengthy look at what our community needs and what's important to our community. And that is basically how all of our service solely revolves around Arlington Heights. I have a couple of soapboxes, and this is one of them. You go to any conference, you read anything in the press, and in just the normal mainstream press, it's what's the future of libraries? What's the library of the future? And I don't think that's the right question at all. I don't think there is any grand unified vision for what a library is in the future. I think as we progress kind of into the 21st century here, what's going to separate libraries one public library is going to look much different than another public library based on community needs. And the success of a public library is solely based on how well they meet the needs of their individual community. So I think we need to stop asking the question, what what is a library, or this is what, or saying this is what a library is, and really what is our community, what are our needs, and how then does the library fit into that. So, and that informs everything about how you provide reference service, how you provide any service. So that was the first thing we thought about here in Arlington Heights. And just for those of you that don't know the community, we're fairly large as far as suburbs go. I would say relatively affluent. I mean, we're not fabulously wealthy, but at the same time, everyone is pretty much solidly in the upper middle class range. Probably the people that work at the library are at the lower end of the economic spectrum here in Arlington Heights. And education is really valued, and educational institutions are really valued. We have very, very, very good public schools, highly rated public schools, and the library too is seen as an educational institution, and our residents are willing to support that with their pocketbooks. And just really value anything that ties into education. And then, as I mentioned, we have a very large small business community here, a lot of business owners. The Chamber of Commerce is a very strong organization here in Arlington Heights. We have, I think, become that third place that everyone talks about, and we've become that really not through any effort on our part, or with our building renovation, we've adapted to that, but we didn't set out to be the place that the community gathers. It just sort of happened. And that's one of the ways when we really looked at how people were using the library, how different it is now than it was, say, 15 years ago. And then technology is very important here. I think because of the relative affluence of the community, technology has really permeated pretty deeply. We're not the place that needs to provide free internet access anymore, because most people have internet access. And in fact, the in-house use of our computers, we're seeing decreases in that over the last couple of years, because that is really not as needed anymore. But what is needed, and what we have been seeing, are technology questions coming in, and increasingly sophisticated ones. And when we offer technology classes, they fill up instantly. So it's gone from sort of providing the access to providing the instruction, and again, in increasingly sophisticated ways. And that's moving into what services we're going to provide then. That was one of the things that was most important to us, is the idea of providing technology instruction. We want to be the go-to place for technology learning in Arlington Heights. And one of the ways we do that is through formal instruction. What you see here, this is in our renovated library. We had an existing computer training lab, but we wanted to really make it a much bigger part of our service model and our building. So the wall behind you that you don't see here is glass, and it's in the middle of the library. People can look in. It really is one of the first things you see in our building is our technology training center, and we offer in the vicinity of 80 classes a month. And we do that, as I said, because when the classes we offered before, they filled up so quickly. And there was such demand. And in the range we offer, it's not just the basic things. We offer all the way up through using GarageBand and using Photoshop. And what you're seeing here, this is our business librarian actually teaching a class on social media for business use. And why this is important in our discussion of reference is I consider this to be the new way of providing reference service. It's delivering the information that is important to our community, delivering it to them in a way that they are best able to receive it. So I think this, at least for Arlington Heights, again, is sort of the new direction that reference is going, that providing of information, because that still is of critical importance. And it's not only in a classroom setting. It's one-on-one as well. We have a digital media lab. We're very lucky to have it. So 5 rooms, actually. And our friends at the library were very generous in equipping those rooms. But you see here, this is Alex. He's our digital media specialist, and he's working here side by side, one-on-one, with somebody who is doing, it looks like, some form of video project. And we're seeing things coming out of this, from students doing homework to, we recently had someone actually produce an instructional DVD for ESL students using solely our equipment. And we helped her. We helped provide that instruction. And again, I look at that as reference service. It might not be what is defined by whatever organization happens to be defining what a reference transaction is, and it might not count toward those reference statistics, but the impact it has on our community is profound, and they don't care that it's not falling under the official definition of what reference is in the library world. A little bit closer to that, though, but still on the theme of technology, is the idea of being able to help people with their gadgets and with their technology. We have 2 staff here, and a service point that's dedicated solely to answering technology questions. So we have Annette here at the desk, and she's helping somebody, but then what you see the gentleman with his back to you, that is a staff member as well, and it looks like he is helping somebody with her own laptop. So she has brought in her device, and she has a question about it and a question about how to use it, and we're helping her with that. And it looks like a laptop here. It could have been a phone, though. It could have been a camera. It could have been a Kindle or an iPad. This is a service that we offer. And it boggles my mind that there are libraries out there that refuse to do this. They think that, well, that's hands-off. That's not what a library does. We don't do that. And I mean, I think that's setting yourself up for failure, because it's not about answering the kinds of questions you want to answer. It's about answering the kinds of questions your customers have. And increasingly, we are seeing those are related to technology, and they're related to gadgets. And as I said, we want to be the go-to place for that information. So that's what we're seeing here. And this is otherwise a fairly standard reference type service model. We have a desk, we have people come up and ask questions. So that is one area where we have really kind of shifted our reference focus to more of a technology bent. But we also emphasize business as well. So we have, this is Shannon on the left there. She is our business librarian, and then Julie, she's our business services associate. They provide help to small business owners, entrepreneurs, on any number of things. They do one-on-one appointments. They're completely booked with those, and a lot of it is very sort of traditional, what you think of sort of up the library's alley, maybe helping them with a database, with Reference USA to create lists of contacts. I mean, that's something that you think of that libraries traditionally would do. But they also help them, say, with their LinkedIn profiles, or you saw Shannon teaching a class on how to use social media for your business. Things that get a little bit outside the scope of what libraries have traditionally done and might not be what you think of as a reference transaction, but again, the business owners don't care. All those people that they're helping, they don't care that it's a reference transaction or not a reference transaction. I mean, this is, in Arlington Heights, reference service. And then sort of a subset of that is job seekers, people who are out of work. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that since 2008, and particularly right in 2008 when the economy kind of went south, we were flooded with people who were newly unemployed, hadn't looked for a job in decades. They didn't know what to do. They were kind of emotionally spent. They were confused. They hadn't written a resume in a long time. Many of them hadn't used email. And we saw that clearly we had a need here. And I think our initial reaction was, wow, what are we going to do? Because we're overwhelmed. But then our reference people kind of stepped it up. And this was in 2008, so this was the time when we still had a very traditional reference model, reference desk, all the books, all of that. What we did is, for a period of about 3 months, at the busiest time of the day, we set up a separate reference desk. It was just something simple as a folding table in the middle of the library, solely to help with job search questions. And a core group of our reference librarians were trained on the sources and various other community agencies to refer people to, and they received some training in this area, and then they stepped it up and they saw a need, and they were very nimble and proactively addressed that need. And then on top of that, we received some grants to bring in speakers, and we We went out to our community supporters and found human resources professionals to come in and do appointment-based resume reviews. And we still do that, in fact. We don't have the separate desk anymore, but we still do have a pretty comprehensive program for people who are out of work that ranges from everything from how to file for unemployment to dealing with the emotional issues, to budgeting for the new reality, to locating job possibilities, applying for jobs, and reviewing resumes, all of that. And that's not all necessarily our reference department that did that, but I consider that reference service. We're taking the need and presenting the information to the people who need it in the way they need it presented to them. So I mean, that's the type of thing that's important, and these are just examples. And in this case especially, our reference department really did step it up. So moving into how we made all this happen, though, as I mentioned, we had to really reorganize the whole library to meet our new service model and our new kind of set of services. And I'm only going to talk about the things that kind of are most applicable to reference here. Okay, so in 2008 we had information services and we had a welcome desk. And what information services did, that was your traditional reference. They did genealogy and business, they dealt with the electronic databases, and what's important here is it was all MLS librarians. And then we had a welcome desk, and they did reader's advisory, book discussions, they did the technology instruction, and help with the public computers, which was interesting because it just sort of happened they were located closest to them, which is the only reason why it fell under that group. And there were no MLS holding librarians. So, and then in addition, we also had a magazine and newspaper department that helped with exactly that, magazines and newspapers, and we also had a reception desk that all the incoming calls came into. And while this seemed great at the time, looking at it now in hindsight, we realize this was totally arranged the way librarians think. It's arranged by format. It's arranged by type of material. To the customer walking in, they have a question they want answered. By the model we had, if it was a question about a fiction book, they went to the welcome desk. If it was a question about nonfiction, they went to information services. If it was a magazine, they went to magazine. I mean, this makes no sense whatsoever to a customer. This is only something organized on paper the way a librarian would do it. And we knew basically two things had to change there. We absolutely needed to have a dedicated group for technology questions. And this is where I think when we refer back to that decrease in reference transactions, it's a little bit misleading. It doesn't mean people aren't coming in and asking questions. Many of us are busier than we were. Increasingly, those questions are about technology that don't always fall within the definition of a reference question. So we saw that, and we knew that we needed to address that if we were to become the go-to place for technology information here in Arlington Heights. But then we also needed to just make things simpler. We didn't want the customer to have to pick between which of 4 desks they needed to go to have their particular question answered. So basically we dissolved all of these departments and we joined them together and merged them into 2 departments. One is digital services and one is info services. And digital services, they handle everything exactly that, digital. So they are in charge of our public computers, helping people on public computers. They are in charge of those gadget questions. People come in with a question about their laptop or about their smartphone. That goes through our digital services department. They're in charge of our digital media lab. They're in charge of the content on our website. They do all of the technology instruction. And they're also in charge of the electronic content here at the library. That was something that was becoming increasingly difficult as new types of things and new formats kept being introduced. At one time, all of our electronic stuff were databases, just like a reference database, and it made a lot of sense that that's under the reference department. But then Then ebooks came along, and there were different ebook platforms. And then for those, you had to pick titles individually. And then streaming products came in. Well, where did those fit? You know, what group is supposed to be looking at those? So we wanted to have one group charged with being the experts in digital content. So, and that's digital services. And so while they don't pick individual titles of ebooks, they do pick the ebook platform. And that was something that was very, I think, very necessary for us, and it's been going very, very well. Then contrast that, info services, they answer everything else from the very basic directional questions all the way up through very in-depth reference questions. And what's important to note here, we have now MLS holding librarians in each of these groups. So info services is no longer only librarians. There are some actually more non-librarians and librarians in there, and there are MLS holding librarians in our digital services group as well. And that was interesting. And I come from a branch management background, so I come from an environment where the only 2 librarians in the building were me and the assistant manager. And I think a lot of people in smaller libraries are very used to that as well, where non-librarians can answer reference questions. But here, we were so specialized for so long, and it was so, the walls were built so high that if you worked the welcome desk, you did not answer a reference question, no matter how simple it was, even if it was looking up a phone number, and vice versa. So it's actually been a very interesting transition to this idea that all staff can answer reference questions and then sort of escalate the question to a librarian if they don't know the answer or they need help. New staff are absolutely fine with it, but it's the legacy people that were here under the old model that some of them are having sort of a time just wrapping their mind around they can do this now. So you probably figured out then that these guys here at our technology desk, this is our digital services staff. And you'll note that there are, and we're kind of going to get into our service model now, and you'll note that there are phones on these desks, but one of the things you will see, or you won't notice when you walk through our libraries, you won't hear any phones ringing. And that was something that was very, very consciously done on our part, that like most places, we wanted to let customers contact us by as many different channels as possible. So we take phones via chat, we take questions via chat, via email, via phone, in person, et cetera, et cetera. And what that was leading to under our old model was sort of this situation where you've got one person at the desk and she's trying to juggle the phone and she's trying to juggle doing things on the computer. People don't know if she's busy or not. And we really wanted to focus our people when they were on the floor to dealing solely with people in the building and being available and accessible and essentially being on stage. We use that phrase, you're always on stage when you're out on the public floor. So we don't have any incoming calls coming directly to the desks. The staff at the desks do not do anything else. They do not answer emails, they do not read professional journals, they do nothing but make themselves available. And the phone calls then come in behind the scenes where we have our info services staff scheduled in what's a call center. We have 5 places there. We try not to say call center to the public because they picture calls going to another country, but we have behind the scenes area to deal with anything that isn't a person-to-person, face-to-face transaction. So they're taking all the chats, they're taking all the calls. And that really has made a tremendous difference. We actually did see, we experimented with this and we kind of prototyped it, just setting up some cubicles in the corner of the public area. And we saw our questions go up that we answered because our librarians on the floor were more available, they looked more available, and at the same time, the people on the phone could focus on the phone. I mean, it's 2 very different kind of ways to interact, and being able to segregate it has been much more effective for us. And then we have this, and this has been compared to an oil rig. My favorite comparison is it has been compared to the Hancock building, and that was totally unintentional, but I can see the resemblance. But what this is our info desk. And this replaces all those other desks I mentioned, the welcome desk, our traditional reference desk. When we looked at the way we wanted to provide service, we went to our architect when we were doing the building and said, design us a service point that doesn't look like a service point, that basically allows us to do exactly what you see here, work side by side with the customers, not across from them, and it doesn't tie us down to being behind anything. It doesn't create a barrier, but it's very intuitive. It stands out to the customer walking in as if they need help, this is the place to go. They're just naturally drawn there. And this is what our architect designed, and we love it. You can see there are really no chairs. I mean, our staff, they're on their feet, they're roving around. They're not necessarily tied to this desk or chained to this desk. It's interesting because you see here what's happening. They're not standing side by side because just some customers are just more comfortable being on the other side of something from you. But many other ones at the same time. It's a much more engaging way to deliver service. We know that there are some longer transactions that require more detail and more in-depth, lengthier processes. So there is a place, you see there on the right, to sit down for those. But in general, we don't have staff just sitting there. And then for those very long things, we take individual appointments. We have appointment areas where staff can go and work one-on-one with people. And that's how we provide that reference service now. So then I think that the main question that everyone wants to know is reference service better now than it was before? And I think that's a tough question to answer. And because it's different for different people. And I freely acknowledge that there are people that do have sort of maybe an esoteric topic area they're interested in and have in-depth reference questions. And is the service better for them now? No, it's not. It's probably worse because there won't necessarily be a librarian waiting for them at a desk to just show up. Instead, there will be librarians or other staff out helping people with all sorts of other things. And so for that individual, they might have to make an appointment, or they might have to have their question referred to a librarian, and then we might have to call them back, or something like that. So it's not the same. But I think it was Joan Fry Williams that said that you wouldn't have a podiatrist giving people pedicures on the off chance that they discover someone with a foot problem while they're there. Well, we think the same about reference librarians. You don't have your most highly paid people sitting waiting for that one person a day that comes in who needs them. Instead, you have them engaged in other ways and doing other things. So for the bulk of the people, library service in general is better, and that's what it's all about. I mean, the pie is only so big. That is something that I feel very strongly about. We are a publicly funded entity, and it's irresponsible of us to devote the largest slice of the resources pie when it comes to staff costs and materials costs to one of the smallest slivers of the demand pie, and it's a sliver that's getting smaller and smaller. So when we look at overall library service, and that includes being able to have a digital services department help people with technology questions, for example, that's more important. And we still can help people with those esoteric questions, those really in-depth reference things. We can still do that, but it's just not done in the same way. And we've reallocated those resources to areas where they can make a bigger impact. And to me, it's really kind of giving up those sacred cows that you have to have a reference department and they have to deliver service in this particular way. It's once you can start to give that up, that you can really do exactly what the title of this webinar is, and make a big community impact and have your service be very impactful to your funders, to your taxpayers, and to your community. So that is all of my content. I am happy to answer questions. I can do it now. I have a slide here that has my email address and my Twitter handle. I will leave this up for a bit if anyone wants to jot that down and follow up with me afterwards in the
Hi,
future.
Jason.
I'm happy to
This is Kate. Can you hear
answer
me?
anything I can, and I do see some
Great.
questions that are
I
coming in
loved
here
your
via the chat.
presentation. I love all your images and so forth.
Let me look at them.
Actually, I recognized a few people in some of
I
your
can.
photos, so that was kind of fun too. Yeah. Our recent graduate, Julie Rand, I saw, and I thought, see,
Oh no!
and it may be Julie Rand. At any rate, that's pretty fun. And yeah, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
I love your final image too of the sacred cow.
So
and I
you
think
know
that's
that was
great.
a staged picture
So we
then,
have,
bummer.
just because it's so thought-provoking, some of the things that you've done in terms of responding to what were obvious community needs, and I really like the point too, I liked a lot of your points, but reorganizing the building to make these changes more effective. So we have a few minutes here for questions and answers. One question that we had in the chat, if you haven't put a question in the chat yet, participants, feel free to go ahead and type a question. We had a question earlier that said, and you can probably see it too, Jason, what other areas of our operation do you think were built more for librarians than for customers?
Oh boy. Gosh. I think I don't want to anger catalogers here, but I think the way cataloging is traditionally done many times is more for the type of information that's included, and for the amount of effort that goes into cataloging, the amount of time, most of the customers don't care about that. So I mean, I think that's a fairly clear area. Customers want to know, you know, for a series of books, which book came first, which book came second, which book came third, which isn't necessarily the way catalogers do it. That's one example. I think I always find the way public libraries arrange biographies to be interesting. We changed fairly recently, but we did have them. It wasn't Dewey, but it was, I think they were, no, it was Dewey, in fact. But we had them arranged kind of by subject, not by the person's name. And we now kind of have a hybrid model of that, where we have some categories that people are likely to browse: politicians, actors, where they just want to browse biographies of actors and politicians. And then we have general biographies that are just in order by who they're about, which is kind of, I think, the more intuitive way to find a biography. And then, of course, anything, Dewey has its own sort of issues where, you know, if you're going to France, your travel guides are in one place, your foreign language dictionaries are in a completely different place. Well, I think it's more intuitive for the customer that
as a matter of fact,
are
it makes
sitting
me
next
think
to
of
each other
something
the way
I've
a
read
bookstore
where
does it. So
the 20th century
those
library
are a couple
is
of
organized
examples.
more on a bibliographic paradigm rather than a user-based paradigm. So that makes a lot of sense. There's two questions here I think we can combine. Sarah and Eric have asked questions, and Sarah talks about librarians as teachers, and then Eric asked about how well that model can fit in a school or an academic library. So do you think that kind of all fits together in terms of this new service model?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I don't have a lot of experience in school. I have no experience in school libraries. I have worked in a community college library before I was a professional librarian, but so I don't have a ton of experience to really even know what the conditions there are now. But I do think in general that a great quote I heard once is the library is going from being an errand that you run, you're in and out, to more of an experience. It's a destination now. And at least for us, I absolutely think learning, people come here to learn. And we're incorporating that in a number of different ways, not only just a formal classroom setting, but we're doing a lot more with just exhibits and almost like museum type displays and things. So yeah, I mean, it might not necessarily be in a classroom setting, but Yes, I mean, I think that is one of the roles of
Yeah,
libraries
that makes a
moving
lot
forward.
of sense. This next question talks about library services being, you know, kind of flattened, if you will, and the question asks, what strategies have you employed to help all the library workers think of the whole rather than the individual parts?
A lot of the way we organized our org structure is it's in groups now. So there's sort of we visually display them as like interlocking circles, and I mean that's totally symbolic. But that is one way, and we're incorporating a lot of types of areas where we have someone in charge of an entire function within the library. Programming is a great example. We have a programs manager that she directly supervises the people that do adult programming, but she coordinates all of the programming across the library. And that was something that's a great example of how we had these silos. We had our children's people who were doing these programs, our adult people who were doing these programs, we had business programs, we had all these different programs, and we were competing with ourselves, essentially, is what was happening. And it wasn't sustainable. We couldn't even promote everything that we were doing effectively. So we have somebody looking at that functional area and coordinating that overall. The same thing, I think, I mentioned our digital services group is in charge of the content of our website. And really, there's 3 different groups in charge of our website. The actual look and feel is by our graphic design department. The content and sort of the user experience is digital services, and the actual coding is IT. So we have 3 different people who report to 3 different groups and to 3 different managers, all working on a single project. And what that does is it forces them to work together and to get a better understanding of the library as a whole.
That makes a lot of sense.
And to
here's
see,
one I think is probably on everyone's
and,
mind.
and
How are
so
you
forth.
now measuring the effectiveness of library work and what was referenced? So in general, yeah, how do you measure and evaluate?
Oh boy. I don't know. That is the question that's on everyone's mind, and it's on ours too. I mean, to be honest, it is. And I think, you know, it's about, you know, yeah, see, I'm fumbling around for an answer because it is, I think, the biggest challenge of this shift from a more transactional-based thing, and knowing that our agencies who, like the state, for example, who we submit statistics to, they haven't brought their definitions around to encompass the actual reality we're seeing in libraries. So I think it depends on who you're measuring for. I mean, you're still, when the state defines something one way, you have to go by that way. But when we're interacting with our board, for example, we're very conscious of explaining what the reality really is. We share, we do a lot of personal stories, a lot of testimonials. We have a newsletter that goes out every other month, and we always try and incorporate customer testimonials in a series called What Can I Do at the Library? And to have those practical outcomes. I gave the example of the woman that created a business, essentially, at her ESL DVDs using the library.
Yeah, that sounds
and
great.
those are the kind of things that we emphasize.
Quick question, this is pretty pragmatic, and I think your answer is going to depend a little bit on your service population. But how many staff members does it take to cover the digital desk each day? And how many does it take to cover the info desk? And of course, our default question here, you talked a little bit about MLIS versus non-MLIS, and so how does that shake out on these 2 service desks?
Okay. Okay. We have 2 people, I think, generally at the digital services desk, and that's not always enough because they're also in the just the public computer area helping people there as well. And then the info desk, it depends on what time of the day. And I showed you the call center there. People rotate between those 2, so it's really just one whole area. And and they're pretty nimble. They can share back and forth. If the phones get busy, one person can go off the desk, and then or vice versa. And we do that because obviously there are no chairs, and we expect people to stand. So we keep the shifts short, an hour. And it's funny because we get comments from customers who submitted a lot about give those people chairs, because they think they're out there for an 8-hour shift or something. But so we keep it short. We have, I don't know exact numbers. I think it's probably between 4 and 6 people like manning the whole area, and that is a decrease from when we had all these individual desks. That was one of the things that we tried to do, is that it does reduce overall staffing, because when you're staffing a bunch of service points, you're always sort of you're overstaffing each of them essentially, because you always want to make sure that you're adequately staffed at each one, and then you end up essentially with some redundancy around. So focusing it down to one, we were actually able to reduce the overall staffing at the desk. And when I say that, we didn't reduce staffing at the library. No one's positions were cut. That's what enabled us to bring in another business services person. We have 5 people in our teen services division.
That's great. That really makes sense.
One of our target audiences. That
well, thanks, Jason. I think Sarah has a few housekeeping details here as we head towards the top of the hour. I've, again, really enjoyed this. And Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, well, thanks, Kate. I wanted to say to our participants today that you will be receiving an evaluation form from us probably next week. And you'll also get information about how to access this webinar, which will be archived. We want to also thank today Daniel Martin, Dominican's Creative Digital Specialist, and Diane Foote, the GSLIS Assistant Dean, who helped us get this set up and put it across. We hope the information you've received today has been helpful, and that it will actually incite you to try new things, that you'll take away some of Jason's enthusiasm and his revealing techniques, and that you too will be reorganizing your whole library. Thanks for joining us.